Sanaa stared at the dinner invitation on her phone for almost a full minute without replying. Sunday family dinner. 7 p.m. Don't be late. Just reading those words made her chest feel heavy. Family dinners at the Okoye house were never really about family. They were quiet competitions hidden behind fake smiles and expensive food. And somehow, Sanaa always ended up being the disappointment sitting at the corner of the table. Her older sister Chioma was everything their parents loved to show off. Perfect marriage, luxury vacations, designer clothes, beautiful house. Every conversation somehow turned into another reason why Chioma was successful. And Sanaa, a single mother living in a small apartment, working long hours, struggling to balance bills, school pickups and exhaustion. To her parents that was failure. She tossed the phone onto the couch and whispered to herself, "I'm not going." But before she could even breathe properly again, little Jabari ran into the room holding his toy dinosaur. "Mom, are we really going to Grandma's house?" he asked excitedly. "Grandpa said he'll make jollof rice." Sanaa forced a small smile. "I don't know yet, baby." Jabari's face immediately fell. "Please. I miss them." That broke her heart more than the invitation itself, because no matter how cold her family could be toward her, Jabari still loved them completely. Later that evening, Sanaa stood in front of the mirror fixing the sleeve of her simple dress while bills sat unpaid on the kitchen counter behind her. She looked tired, not just physically, deep in the soul tired. Jabari walked up beside her wearing his tiny sneakers and smiled proudly. "You look pretty, Mom." Her eyes watered instantly. Nobody had said something kind to her in weeks. She grabbed her purse, took a deep breath, and held Jabari's small hand tightly. Not because she wanted to go, but because sometimes mothers walk back into painful places just to protect the happiness in their child's eyes. There was a time when Sanaa believed love could fix anything. Back then she was the hopeful daughter, a quiet dreamer. The one who believed marriage would finally make her family proud of her. But the man she married slowly turned her life into something painful. At first, the abuse was small things hidden behind smiles. Controlling her money, telling her what to wear, making her feel stupid during arguments. Then came the shouting, the insults, the nights she cried silently in the bathroom so nobody would hear her. And the worst part, most people never saw it. Outside the house, her husband acted charming and successful. People called them the perfect couple. But behind closed doors, Sanaa was falling apart. Some nights, she would sit on the kitchen floor holding baby Jabari while her husband screamed from the other room. She remembered looking at her little boy one night and realizing something terrifying. If she stayed, Jabari would grow up believing pain was normal. So she left, not because she was weak, because she finally chose survival. But her family never saw it that way. The day she came back home carrying 2 bags and holding Jabari in her arms, her mother Helena looked more embarrassed than concerned. "You should have endured it," she had said coldly. Her father Moses shook his head with disappointment. "You ruined your life over temporary problems." Those words stayed inside Sanaa for years. Ruined your life, as if leaving abuse was the mistake. After the divorce, life became brutal. Sanaa worked exhausting jobs during the day and stayed awake at night trying to calculate bills she couldn't afford. There were weeks she skipped meals so Jabari could eat properly. Sometimes she cried quietly after he fell asleep, terrified about rent, school fees, and electricity notices piling up on the table. Meanwhile, Chioma's life looked perfect. Luxury vacations, expensive handbags, beautiful anniversary photos online. Family gatherings always turned into celebrations about Chioma's successful life. Helena proudly showed guests her pictures. "That's my daughter," she would say with glowing eyes. But when people asked about Sanaa, the room always became awkward. "She's trying her best," Helena would answer softly. Trying her best. Like Sanaa's entire existence had become a warning story the family wanted to hide. And after hearing it for years, Sanaa slowly stopped defending herself. Because sometimes the people who break your heart the most are the ones who are supposed to love you without conditions. By the time Sanaa and Jabari arrived at the Okoye house, the dinner had already started. The large home glowed with warm golden lights from the outside. Expensive cars filled the driveway, and soft jazz music played through hidden speakers inside the house. Everything looked elegant, perfect, like the kind of family people admired from a distance. Sana suddenly felt underdressed the moment she stepped inside. Her simple brown dress suddenly looked even older next to Chioma's expensive designer outfit. Her worn handbag felt embarrassing beside the luxury brands sitting around the room. But Jabari smiled happily the second he saw his grandparents. "Grandma!" he shouted, running toward Helena. Helena hugged him warmly, but when her eyes lifted toward Sana, her smile faded slightly. "You made it," she said politely. Not warmly, just politely. Sana quietly nodded and removed her shoes near the door while already feeling like she didn't belong there. At the dining table, everything looked expensive. Crystal glasses, beautiful candles, perfectly folded napkins. Even the food looked like it belonged in a luxury hotel. Chioma sat beside her husband looking flawless, laughing loudly while everyone listened carefully to every word she said. "We spent last month in Santorini," Chioma said proudly while showing vacation pictures on her phone. "Honestly, I didn't even want to come back." Her husband laughed. "Tell them about the yacht dinner." "Oh my God, yes." Chioma smiled dramatically. "It was magical." Helena looked at her daughter with glowing pride. "My Chioma deserves the world," she said. Moses nodded approvingly. "And now your husband got promoted again. That's impressive." The entire table praised them non-stop. Meanwhile, Sana quietly sat there cutting food into small pieces for Jabari while pretending not to notice how invisible she felt. Nobody asked about her work. Nobody asked how she was surviving. Nobody asked if she was tired. And honestly, she was exhausted. At one point, Helena's eyes dropped toward Sana's shoes for a brief second before quickly looking away again. But Sana noticed. She always noticed. Then came the question she hated most. "So Sana," Chioma asked casually while sipping wine, "are you still working that office job?" The table suddenly became quieter. Sana forced a small smile. "Yes, still there." Chioma gave a fake sympathetic nod. "Well, as long as it pays the bills." Sana quietly looked down at her plate. The comment sounded small, but everyone at the table understood what it really meant. "You're still struggling. You still haven't become someone we admire." And the painful part wasn't even the judgment anymore. It was how used to it Sana had become. As dinner continued, the laughter around the table slowly became harder for Sana to sit through. Every conversation somehow circled back to money, success, promotions, expensive trips, or perfect marriages. And every time Chioma spoke, the family listened like she was someone important. Meanwhile, Sana quietly stayed in the background, helping Jabari eat his food and forcing polite smiles whenever someone looked her way. After dinner, Jabari carried his crayons and notebook to the kitchen counter nearby. He happily sat there drawing superheroes while softly humming to himself. The adults barely paid attention to him anymore. To them he was just a child, too distracted to understand grown-up conversations. And that was when everything changed. Moses leaned back in his chair and glanced toward Sana with disappointment sitting openly on his face. "You know," he muttered quietly, shaking his head, "Sana became the family failure." The words hit her chest like a physical slap. Nobody reacted. Nobody defended her. Not even Chioma. Helena sighed tiredly while slowly sipping her drink. "She had so much potential," she said softly. "But she wasted her life making emotional decisions." Sana felt her throat tighten instantly. Wasted her life. As if surviving abuse was stupidity. As if raising her son alone meant she had failed as a woman. She lowered her eyes toward her plate because she could already feel tears trying to form. But she refused to cry there. Not in front of them. Not again. Across the table, Chioma avoided eye contact completely, pretending to scroll through her phone while the silence grew heavier. Moses continued speaking like Sana wasn't even sitting there. If she had just stayed patient and listened to advice, her life could have looked very different today. Helena nodded sadly. Now look at her. Struggling every month. No husband. No future. It's painful to watch. Sanaa's fingers tightened around the fork in her hand. For a second, she couldn't even breathe properly. Because the painful part wasn't only the cruelty. It was how casually they said those things. Like her sacrifices meant nothing. Like the sleepless nights, the fear, the survival, the hard work, and the love she poured into Jabari every single day were completely invisible. And only a few feet away, little Jabari quietly stopped drawing, listening to every single word. The room stayed heavy after Helena's last comment. Nobody spoke for a few seconds. Only the soft sound of dishes and the quiet jazz music filled the silence. Sanaa kept staring down at her plate, trying to control her breathing before the tears in her eyes became visible. She had spent years teaching herself how to survive moments like this. Smile politely. Stay quiet. Pretend the words don't hurt. But this time felt different. Because Jabari had heard everything. Near the kitchen counter, his crayons sat forgotten beside his unfinished drawing. The little boy stood completely still, his small shoulders tense. Then slowly, he walked into the dining room. First, nobody noticed him. Moses was reaching for his drink. Chioma was checking her phone again. Helena looked irritated, like the conversation had simply been uncomfortable instead of cruel. But then Jabari's tiny voice broke through the room. "Grandpa!" Everyone looked up. Sanaa's heart instantly dropped when she saw his face. His eyes were watery, and for the first time that night, he didn't look excited to be there anymore. He looked hurt, deeply hurt. "Jabari, baby," Sanaa started softly, but he kept looking at his grandfather. His voice shook as he spoke. "If my mom is a failure." The entire table froze immediately. Then why does she work every day to save everyone? Complete silence. Nobody moved. Nobody even breathed properly. Helena blinked in shock. Chioma slowly lowered her phone. Moses stared at the child like he genuinely didn't know what to say. And Jabari kept going, his little voice trembling harder now. "When I have bad dreams, she stays awake with me all night." He looked toward Sanaa with tears filling his eyes. "When I'm sick, she doesn't sleep." His breathing became uneven. "She works when she's tired. She smiles when she's sad. And she always says family matters most." Sanaa felt tears finally slide down her face. Because every word coming from her son was honest. Pure honest love. The kind nobody at that table had shown her in years. Jabari wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his shirt before looking back at Moses again. "So how is she a failure?" Nobody answered him. Not Helena. Not Chioma. Not even Moses. Because suddenly all the expensive clothes, luxury vacations, promotions, and fake perfect appearances around that table felt small compared to the exhausted single mother sitting quietly in tears while her son defended her with his whole heart. And for the first time that night, the room finally felt ashamed. The silence after Jabari's words felt unbearable. Nobody at the table knew where to look anymore. Sanaa quickly wiped her tears, embarrassed that her son had defended her like that. She gently reached for his hand, trying to calm him down, but Jabari held onto her tightly like he was scared someone would hurt her again. And that was when memories Sanaa had buried for years started flooding back into her mind. Because the painful truth was, nobody sitting at that table had any idea how much she had sacrificed for them. Not even once. A few years earlier, Moses had almost lost the house after secretly falling behind on loan payments. His pride was too strong to tell anyone, so he quietly panicked alone while debt letters kept arriving. Then suddenly the debt disappeared. Anonymous payments. Moses spent months wondering who helped him. He never found out. 'Cause it was Sanaa. She had taken extra shifts for nearly 6 months straight, barely sleeping, just to protect her parents from losing their home. And she never told anyone, not for praise, not for recognition, just because they were family. Then there was Helena's medical bills. When her insurance stopped covering important medication, Helena cried privately on the phone one night, terrified about costs. 2 days later, someone paid everything anonymously. Again, Sanaa. She remembered sitting in her tiny apartment afterward, calculating what bills she would have to delay now that her savings were gone. But she never regretted helping her mother. Even Chioma had no idea. The perfect daughter, almost faced financial disaster the previous year after her husband made a terrible business investment. Luxury lifestyles looked beautiful online, but behind the scenes, they were drowning in pressure. Then somehow the crisis disappeared. Chioma assumed her husband fixed it quietly. Reality: Sana had secretly sent money through someone else so her sister would never feel embarrassed. The same sister who now sat across from her acting ashamed of her existence. And the cruelest part of all, every single time the family received help, they called it a blessing, a miracle, good fortune. Meanwhile, the woman sacrificing her sleep, her savings, her peace, and sometimes even her own meals to protect them sat quietly at the edge of the table being called the family failure. The silence around the table became painfully heavy. Nobody knew what to say after Jabari defended his mother. Sana gently tried pulling him closer to her side, embarrassed and emotional at the same time. "Jabari baby, it's okay," she whispered softly. But the little boy shook his head. "No, it's not okay." His tiny voice cracked, and that somehow hurt more than shouting ever could. Everyone watched him now. Even Chioma looked uncomfortable for the first time all night. Jabari looked at his grandparents with watery eyes, trying hard to understand something that didn't make sense to him. "You said my mom is a failure," he whispered. "But she's the hardest working person I know." Moses opened his mouth slightly, but no words came out. And then Jabari innocently kept talking. "Mom cries at night sometimes because she's tired." The room went completely still. Sana instantly froze. Her face filled with panic because she never wanted anyone knowing that part of her life. Not the nights she sat on the bathroom floor crying quietly after Jabari slept. Not the fear. Not the exhaustion. Not the loneliness. But children notice everything. Even the things parents try desperately to hide. Jabari sniffed softly before continuing. "Sometimes I wake up and hear her crying in the kitchen." Helena slowly lowered her eyes toward the table. Sana felt humiliated. Not because her son spoke the truth, but because this was the first time anyone in her family was finally hearing what her life actually looked like. Jabari looked toward his grandfather again. "And one time," he said quietly, "Mom wanted new shoes because hers were broken." Sana's heart dropped instantly. She already knew what he was about to say. "Jabari," she whispered nervously. But he kept going innocently. "She said Grandpa's medicine matters more than buying herself shoes." Moses froze completely. Helena's face lost all color. Even Chioma slowly looked up in shock, because suddenly pieces started connecting inside their minds. The anonymous pharmacy payments, the medical bills disappearing, timing, the sacrifices. Sana quickly looked away, unable to handle their stares anymore. She still remembered those shoes. The soles had nearly fallen apart after months of overtime shifts. Her feet hurt every day walking to work in them. She had stood inside a store once, quietly checking the price of a cheap replacement pair before putting them back, because Moses needed medication that week. And to her, his health mattered more. Even after everything they said about her. Even after years of judgment. And somehow that truth made the room feel smaller. Heavier, because the woman they mocked for being unsuccessful had been silently sacrificing pieces of herself to keep all of them standing. Nobody touched their food anymore. The expensive dinner table that once felt full of pride and judgment now felt painfully quiet. Chioma stared at Sana like she was seeing her sister for the first time in years. Not as the struggling single mother. Not as the family disappointment. But as someone who had been carrying everyone else while quietly falling apart herself. Her mind kept replaying Jabari's words over and over. Grandpa's medicine matters more than buying herself shoes. Suddenly, memories started hitting her all at once. The mysterious money transfer that arrived last year when her husband's business deal collapsed. Chioma remembered crying in her bedroom that night, terrified they were about to lose everything. Bills piled up. Credit cards frozen, her husband secretly panicking every day. Then suddenly, money appeared through a private transfer. No name, no message, just enough to save them. Her husband had assumed an investor helped quietly. But now, Chioma slowly looked at Sana with growing horror. "Wait," she whispered softly. Sana immediately lowered her eyes because she already knew what her sister was realizing. Meanwhile, Helena sat completely frozen. Her hands trembled slightly as memories flooded her mind too. The hospital bills, the pharmacy payments, the months when Moses almost lost the house. All those times they called the help a miracle from God. And all along, it had been their own daughter, the same daughter they humiliated at the dinner table. Helena suddenly remembered one painful moment clearly. About a year earlier, she had called Sana late at night crying about medication costs. Sana's voice sounded exhausted on the phone, but she still calmly said, "Don't worry, Mom. Everything will be okay." 2 days later, the bills disappeared. At the time, Helena never even thought to ask how, because part of her never believed Sana was capable of saving anyone. That realization shattered something inside her. Moses slowly leaned back in his chair, speechless now. For years, he had proudly praised Chioma's luxurious lifestyle while quietly judging Sana's small apartment, simple clothes and tired face. But now he understood something deeply painful. Chioma looked successful. Sana had been sacrificial. And nobody noticed the difference. Not once. Sana sat there silently wiping tears from her cheeks, looking deeply uncomfortable now that the truth was slowly surfacing. Because she never helped them expecting praise. She never wanted applause. She just loved her family more than they loved her. And somehow, that made the guilt around the table feel even worse. The room no longer felt like a family dinner. It felt like everyone had just been forced to face a truth they spent years ignoring. Nobody could even look at Sana properly anymore. Not after realizing the woman they called a failure had quietly protected all of them while struggling alone. Moses cleared his throat awkwardly, trying to break the silence, but even he sounded smaller now. "Sana," he started carefully. Maybe we judged you too harshly." The words sounded uncomfortable coming from him, like pride was fighting every second of the apology. Sana didn't answer immediately. She just sat there holding Jabari close while staring down at the untouched food on her plate. For years she had imagined hearing an apology from her family. But now that it was finally happening, it didn't heal anything, because some wounds become too old. Helena's eyes filled with tears. "We didn't know," she whispered painfully. "Why didn't you tell us?" That question almost made Sana laugh, not because it was funny, 'cause it hurt. She slowly looked up at her mother for the first time that night. "When exactly would I have told you?" she asked quietly. Nobody answered. Her voice remained calm, but every word carried years of pain behind it. "Every time I came here, I was reminded that I wasn't enough." Chioma lowered her eyes instantly. Sana swallowed hard before continuing. "You saw my small apartment and thought I failed." She looked toward her father. "You saw my divorce and thought I was weak." Then toward the entire table. "You looked at my struggles and decided my life had no value." Tears slowly rolled down Helena's cheeks now. But Sana wasn't angry anymore. That was the heartbreaking part. She sounded tired, like someone who had carried disappointment for too long. Then she gently wiped tears from Jabari's face and said the words that completely shattered the room. "You only measured success by appearances." Silence. Her voice softened as she looked down at her son. "But my son measured love." Nobody moved after that. The sentence hung heavily in the air like something permanent. Because suddenly all the things this family worshipped, money, image, luxury, status, felt meaningless compared to the little boy who saw greatness in a mother everyone else overlooked. Jabari wrapped his tiny arms around Sana tightly, almost protectively, and for the first time in years, Sana finally felt seen. After that night, nothing in the Okoye house felt the same again. The respect that used to belong only to Chioma slowly shifted. Not because Sana asked for it, but because nobody could unsee what they had heard. Chioma sat quietly most of the time now, avoiding eye contact. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel proud of her success. She felt ashamed of how blind she had been. Helena couldn't sleep that night. She kept thinking about every harsh word she had said to Sana over the years. Every time she called her a disappointment. Every time she compared her to Chioma. Every time she chose pride over understanding. Even Moses stayed silent for a long time. The man who once judged his daughter the most now realized something painful. He had confused appearance with worth. And Sanaa. She didn't stay for long after that dinner. She simply stood up, held Jabari's hand, and left without arguing anymore. No loud goodbye. No revenge. Just silence. Because she didn't need their approval anymore. Later that night, Sanaa and Jabari sat on the small balcony of their apartment. The city lights were soft in the distance. The air was quiet, peaceful. They were sharing a small cup of ice cream, laughing softly about something silly Jabari had said earlier. Jabari suddenly looked up at her, his voice innocent but serious. "Mom, are you really a failure?" Sanaa froze for a second. Her eyes filled, but this time she didn't look away. She gently smiled, tired but warm. Before she could even answer, Jabari stood up on the chair and hugged her tightly. His little arms wrapped around her neck like he never wanted to let go. "Because I think you're the strongest person alive." That broke her completely. Sanaa closed her eyes, holding him back like he was her whole world, and for the first time she believed it too. "My parents called me a failure. But my son saw the sacrifices they were too blind to notice.